Hi, I'm Cheri Carlson from Artbeads.com, and today I'm going to show you how to weave a bracelet on the Endless Loom, a loom from Moffett-Hall and the Beadsmith. So I'm going to show you how to make a simple bracelet on the Endless Loom. It's super easy, and one of the really unique features of this loom is that you create the clasp portion of the bracelet first. And so what you need to do is decide what type of clasp you want to use. In this case, I've used the really simple little magnetic brass, antique brass clasps, which I love. They're a really nice flush finish and go together really easily. I've used the Artbeads Designer Blend in Desert Sage, which I think is really pretty. I love anything earth toned, and I just love the bronze and moss green in this particular blend. And I've done a really simple stripe, so you don't have to worry about a pattern too much other than just matching your stripes as you go. One of the really unique things about this loom is that because you're starting with that clasp first, you are able to warp your threads around the loom continuously from one side of your clasp to the other, and then when you're done, you only have your one thread to weave back into your piece. So I'm going to start off and show you how to create the starting pieces onto your clasp. So I've got about 1.5 yards or so of thread on my needle. I'm using a size 10 beading needle, long. And the first thing I'm going to do is put a stopper bead on my thread. So I'm bringing that down towards the end of the thread. I'm leaving about 8 inches or so of a tail, and then I'm inserting that needle back through the stopper bead. And then one more time back through the bead in the same direction, and that's going to help hold my seed beads in place for our start. So my pattern is a brass, a green, a white, a silver, a white, a green, and a brass bead. So I have those loaded on my needle, and I slide the beads on down to the stopper bead. So now what I want to do is stack a bronze bead on top of this bronze bead. This is the square stitch. So I've picked up a bronze bead on my needle, and then I'm running the needle through from the other side and then pulling the thread tight until that bead stacks on top, like so. And then you want to run the needle through that new bead that you just added. And the first one or two are a little loose and wobbly, but it'll tighten up as we go. So what I want to do next is stack a green bead on top of this one. So I've picked it up in my needle, and I'm going through just that green bead, and I'm pulling that tight. And you have to kind of fuss with the little beads a little bit to get them to straighten out at first. I pull that tight, and then I'm going to run my thread through, just that green bead. There, and you can see how those are beginning to stack up. And next, now you can actually kind of separate them from the pod or the herd, and they'll hold together. So the next bead is the white bead, picking one up, going into the other white bead from the back, pulling it tight, and then running the needle through. Then I've got the clear bead. And running the needle through. And you just do this to the end of your row. Okay, and I'm just adding my last bead. And stitching back through it. And then the last step with the square stitch is then to run your thread through the entire length of the row below it. And then I like to go back one to the row above and just do that whole row, particularly with these larger size beads. They're a little wobbly, and this just helps keep your rows in a nice line. So you can see how the square stitch built on top, one row to the top, and you're going to circle through. If you were to continue with the square stitch, you would continue circling back through all the rows to keep those nice and even. But we're not going to do that. We're going to now add one side of our clasp to one of these sides. And so what I know about this clasp is I've got 3 loops, and I want that center loop centered within my bracelet. So I'm going to move my thread to the center bead, and I'm actually going to build my clasp on the side that my stopper bead is on, just because that's where my thread's going to go. And I'm going to move that thread so it's coming out between my center bead and the bead next to it, like so. Okay, so I'm going to center a bead over this middle bead. So I'm putting that on my needle, and then I'm running the thread through the first loop of the center loop of my clasp, like so. And then I'm going to go back through that bead and pull it down snug. Whoops, there we go. So that it's centered over my center bead. Then I'm going to go back through this bead. Oops, okay, I'm going to pick it up in my hands. So I'm going to go through the center bead, snug it up. I'm going to go back through my, back up through my bead. And then I'm going to flip it over. I'm coming through the loop again, and then down through the bead. There. So it's nice and snug, and I have that thread going through that center loop on the clasp a couple times. Now I'm going to move over one bead. So I'm going to pick up another bead, and it doesn't really matter which direction I go through these loops, as long as I get them secure. So whatever is easiest through the back this time, and now down through the loop. And I'm going to go back through this bead so that that thread makes a circle around this bead. And then I'm going to pull it a little snug, and up through the bead again, through the loop, and down through the bead again. There we go. So when I'm looking at this, my bead is being pulled this direction towards the center bead, but I would like it centered over these 2 beads a little bit. I think it would look better. And so I could pull my thread over this way and go through this bead, but this thread is going to show on this outside edge. So I'm not going to do that right now. I'm going to go ahead and go over to the other bead and secure it bead on through the next loop, and then down through the bead, whoops, and through the other bead, so that makes a loop. And then we're going to go up through again so that we get a couple threads onto that clasp loop. And so same situation on this bead. I have these little beads going in towards the center. So what I want to do is get this thread back to the other side, coming out this direction. I'm going to go up through the bead. Oops. And down. And so now I can pull this over and decide if this thread is going to show much. I want to enter the bead from this direction, and then I'm going to go all the way down to the other side. There we go. And you can see how that's pulled the bead a little more over the two beads and centered it a little bit better. I'm going to do the same on this end. There we go. Okay, so I have the beads centered a little better on my clasp. And so this is how you start. This is the start of one side. So now we're going to tie this thread off. And to do that, I'm going to weave it in just a few beads on this outside edge. And I'm going to tie a knot. And to do that, I want to catch the threads that are running between the beads with my needle. And I'm kind of pinching that needle up against those beads so that my thread stays between those two beads and forms this little loop. Then I'm going to run my needle through the loop and pull it tight to form a knot. And then I'm going to do that one more time and pull that tight. And then I'm going to weave the tail in between the beads and then trim that. Then the same with my tail. So I'm going to put the needle on my tail end, and I'm going to weave that thread off just like I did the first. Okay, so now we need to do our starter row of beads on the second portion of the clasp. But this time we do it with enough yardage of thread to warp the loom. So I'm going to pull off a few yards of thread just to get myself started. And my bracelet is 7 beads wide, which means I need 8 warping threads. So 1 to the outside of each side and then 1 thread in between. And so we pick up our loom, and let's see, I guess we want our bar to the outside. And I'm just going to hold this thread with my thumb, and I'm going to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So you can see I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 spaces and 8 threads for my beads. And then we're going to wrap about 6 more times around the loom, which is going to give us enough thread to weave on our first 2 rows of square stitch. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And then we're going to trim that, and then pull all that thread off. This is going to be enough thread to start our first couple rows of square stitch, and then it's going to be the thread that actually warps the loom endlessly, and then it becomes the thread that we use to start our stitching. Okay, so I have my 2 rows of square stitch done, and I've sewn my clasp onto it, and then I want to maneuver my thread. Oh, and I've tied off my tail, and then I want to maneuver the thread that's left on the needle so that it's coming out of one of the end beads. And then I'm going to put my clasp together, and lay my beads, or my clasp section of beads, on the loom. Now, my bracelet has an odd number of beads, and so I'm going to warp this thread around the loom this way, in which case I have the thread coming out of this bottom bead. If you had an even number of beads, you would want the thread coming out of the top, and then you would warp the threads this way. So I'm flipping it back because I have an odd number, and I'm just going to hold the bracelet with my thumb, and I'm going to bring it around to the other side. So I've gone around the loom. Now I have my loom set for a size 7.5, and so you'll set it for whatever bracelet size that you want to make. And now with my needle, oops, I'm just going to kind of secure that with my finger. With my needle, I'm going to run it through this end bead from the outside and pull that tight. And now this is making the second warp. So now I'm bringing it around the loom the opposite direction. And I want that thread to go between these 2 beads. So I'm going to thread my needle through the beads like that. And pull that tight. And then I'm going to go back the other way again. And this time I want the beads to go, the thread to go between those 2 beads. So I just thread my needle. Move that. There we go. And then back around and through the next row. And you just continue doing this to the other side so that you end up with a warp of thread between each bead on each side of the bracelet. Okay, so you can see that I'm coming out of the end on the first side, and so this time when I bring it around to this side, I need this warp thread to be to the outside of this bead. So I'm going to enter the bead from the outside. There we go. So now we have all our beads lined up, all our warp threads lined up, and I'm just going to kind of pull that tight. So to secure it, I'm going to tie the thread in a knot around this warp thread. And so kind of in the same manner, we're going to make a loop, and then we're going to run our needle through the loop. And then pull that tight. And I'm going to do that one more time. So now, before we start weaving, we're going to center our piece in the center of the loom. And so I'm going to loosen up on the tension rods, and then that will allow me to slide this back in position so that I have this open area to work in, and then I'm going to tighten up the tension rods again, and that's going to give me nice firm tension on my threads. But before we can start weaving, I need my needle to be coming out of the bead on this side if I'm right-handed. If I'm left-handed, I want my thread coming out on this side. So I'm going to just position that through that last bead and pull the thread out. Okay, and now we're ready to weave our first row of beads. So I'm going to pass the needle underneath the loom, and then I'm picking up my dark bronze, a green, an ivory, a clear, ivory, green, and bronze bead again. And then I'm sliding those beads all the way down. And then positioning those under the threads, and then as you can see, they almost pop into place. You just push them up with your fingers and get them in line, and then I'm going to run my needle through these beads, but I want the needle to run above these warp threads, so I want to make sure that I'm kind of aiming up as I'm putting that needle through the beads, and that's through all of them, and then pulling it snug. And then to do the next row, same thing. Bronze, green. Just pushing up a little and then running my needle through and pulling it snug. And then you'll work your way around the loom, and as you get closer to this edge, you just want to slide your work back, and to do that, just loosen up the tension rod, slide it back, put the tension rod in. As you go, as you're adding beads, the piece is going to get tighter and tighter, and so you may want to go to a slightly smaller tension rod, and you can tell as you go. Just you know, if it's too tight, just go down one and use one that's just a slightly smaller. As you can see now, I've woven my pattern all the way around, and I'm getting close to the other side. I do still have a tension rod in here, which is putting tension on the threads and spreading the bracelet out. So it's going to be a little difficult to tell, you know, how do I need another row of beads? Maybe 2 rows of beads. It's a little hard to see. So what I recommend doing is taking the bracelet off the loom and then laying it out on your work surface in front of you, and then just smoothing the beads out, and then taking a look. And you can see that I'm very close to not needing another row of beads. And what is recommended is that you let this piece rest for about an hour, and the thread will kind of go back to its original shape. It's been stretched now for a while. And so let this set and see what the threads do, and then go again and just smooth out these beads, and you can see that we may not need another row of beads at all. And then if that's the case, then you'll just take this last, your only leftover thread, and weave that into your piece and then tie it off. And so that's the really neat part about this loom, is you don't have all these, we would typically have 8 threads on this side and 8 threads on this side to weave back into the work, but we only have 1. So it makes this part of the piece so much faster. And then that's it. So thank you for joining me today. I hope you found this tutorial helpful, and I think you'll find the Endless Loom really fun to work with. Bye-bye.